Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 280 of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Stick to Your Gut, an interview with Emily Hogan. My name is Matt Sabatello.
My name is Richard Johannesson.
Every single person dealing with Lyme disease is going to benefit from this podcast episode. Emily Hogan was a Western nurse who was misdiagnosed with a wide variety of conditions for many of her peers. Her health continued to decline until she finally saw a naturopathic doctor who tested her for Lyme disease through IGeneX. She tested positive, utilized Eastern medicine in combination with her Western training, and was able to overcome and heal from chronic Lyme disease. So without further ado, Emily Hogan in Stick to Your Gut.
Hey, Emily Hogan, and welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are excited to have you, Emily. It's been a long time coming, and we have so much to talk about with you. And it's always exciting for us to speak with folks who have a Western medical background and who have had to turn east in order to be able to get themselves healed. And, you know, that's going to be, I think, one of the things our folks are going to really enjoy about this podcast. And we're really looking forward to fleshing that out with you. So let's talk about your background, Emily. You are a nurse, and talk to us about your nursing background first.
Yeah, so I pretty much always knew I wanted to become a nurse. Ever since high school, I did a internship in the emergency room, and it pretty much solidified it from there. But I love kids, so I really wanted to do a pediatric ICU job from the very beginning. So after high school, I graduated and went to University of Portland, where I got my bachelor's of science in nursing. And I graduated and immediately went into the pediatric floor nursing. And then from there went on into the pediatric ICU, which was my dream. And worked in the pediatric ICU for about 3 years up until now and everything. But yeah, that was pretty much my dream all along.
So you shared with us that you were dreaming about nursing from the very beginning. But talk to us about the very beginning. Where did you grow up, and what was it like growing up where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Reno, Nevada, and I had a really big family in Nevada. I had 17 of us cousins and aunts and uncles and everyone kind of running around. But we kind of grew up in a big family where we were really into the outdoors, really into kind of everything. And I don't know what strikes me about science, but from the very beginning, I loved science classes and everything. And I loved kind of the journey of being there for people in their hardest times. And so both together, it was kind of how I chose nursing from the beginning. But yeah.
So you had this outdoorsy childhood. You had this aptitude for science. You wanted to apply that to the healing arts, and off you went into nursing school and ultimately to nursing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, talk to us about what type of safety precautions you took when you were an outdoorsy gal, right? You and your 17 cousins are running around and you're doing all kinds of things outdoors, and probably playing different types of games and hiding in the woods and the weeds and in the bushes. Were you given any safety precautions to make sure that you didn't get either bitten or sick from anything out in the outdoors?
You know, we had safety precautions for just about everything else. We brought whistles with us in case there were bears and all the things, but ticks were never anything that we even worried about. We had a family that we basically grew up with as second cousins, and at their place, at their cabin, there were ticks everywhere, and me and my cousins would get ticks, and we would use fire and we would get them out, and there was never any worry about it. It just seems like you got rid of them, that was it, and move on. But
now, wait a minute, we have to pause there for a second. You said you used fire to get rid of them. What do you mean use fire?
We did, like lighters. And the thing back then was you use lighters and you would draw them out and then you would remove them, which now is not the right thing to do at all. But yeah, that's how we grew up. And, you know, everything else was a huge fear in the wilderness, but ticks were never what we were nervous about.
Emily, you said you were a science geek when you were a kid. You had this passion and this aptitude for science. I mean, did the fact that you had these ticks biting you, and and that was a part of that experience? Did you do any research on them? Did you learn anything about them?
You know, I didn't. For some reason, it didn't strike me. No one talks about ticks. No one did anything. So it just seemed like it was this harmless little weird bug that you got rid of, and that was it, you know? So unfortunately, I didn't.
So how many times during your childhood do you recall getting bitten when you were at that the tick cabin?
I personally never had any that we found. My cousins, however, I mean, there were countless. And it was kind of, we all wore hats. We all knew about it. But, like I have some pretty big curly hair. So, it was kind of like, who knows, I'll put this hat on, but the rest of me is still all out there. So, yeah.
And I always think it's funny when people are wearing hats. It's not like ticks are jumping out of trees, right? So
I
wearing a
know.
hat to protect
And
myself.
that's what we thought though.
Yeah.
That was literally as a kid, that's what I thought. I was like, all right, they're jumping out of the trees. If I put this hat on, we're good.
So now the kid with with an aptitude for science and a passion for the healing arts goes to nursing school. So what'd you learn about ticks and tick vectors when you were in nursing school?
Absolutely nothing. It didn't even, once come up in school. Like it was literally not even kind of talked about.
So after you went to school, you did various internships, and you did your your preliminary work before you became a licensed nurse. Were you introduced to ticks or vectors, or either mosquitoes or ticks or any of these kinds of bugs that could spit diseases into people and make them sick? Did you learn anything about those things when you were studying, and doing these internships before you became a nurse?
No, we didn't learn anything. So I had gone abroad during my nursing program, and I was living in Salzburg, Austria at the time. And I had gone camping and hiking and done all the things over in Europe as well. And while I was over there, I had developed this weird rash that they just couldn't figure out what was going on. And they thought it was maybe like a ringworm rash. And so I was putting medication on it and kind of got a fever and all the things. But at the time still, and this is my third year into nursing school, hadn't learned anything. And so
Okay.
even at this point, I hadn't heard anything about Lyme disease.
All right, so let's pause there for a second. So you're bouncing around in Europe on your internship, right? You're going camping, you're doing all kinds of things, and something happens and you find a rash on your body. Now, when you found the rash on your body, did that cause you to seek medical attention, or did you just treat it yourself?
I unfortunately have been, which is kind of interesting with everything, have been very prone to illness as a kid throughout my whole life. And so at the time, it was just kind of another thing. It was like I was in Austria and I had a director there who I went to and was saying I was sick. I had this weird rash. Could I please see a medical doctor? And so they did take me to a doctor at the time. But it just to me seemed like another thing at the time.
Okay, so now the medical doctor gave you some cream to treat this rash that you have, right?
Yes.
Do you know what kind of cream the doctor gave you? Was it a steroidal cream that was treating the rash? And now that you know what you know, do you think perhaps the steroidal cream, I can't say that word, suppressed your immune system and actually caused you to get sicker?
It was a steroidal cream. At the time, I don't know if I could say that that's what was making me sicker, but I definitely don't think it helped because I had used it for like almost 3 weeks and nothing had changed. So obviously, it was not the correct thing to do. But yes, it was a steroidal cream. I think it probably did more harm than good, but I
Okay.
don't think it was my tipping point.
So, well, again, we'll talk about tipping points as we get there. So you now have this 3-week course of steroids you're using. You're now going about your life. And how did your symptoms begin to develop?
Yeah, so I had pretty much flu-like symptoms throughout, and to me, I thought it was just a regular thing. And so I kind of got through it, and the rash eventually went away after about 5 weeks, and all my flu-like symptoms pretty much went away and suppressed. And to be fair, to give the background, I was studying abroad as a young kid, wanting to have fun and live my life. And so I think I also somewhat suppressed it in my mind, whether it was actually the symptoms were actually gone or not. And so I actually was able to pretty much kind of get rid of most of the symptoms at that point.
All right, so your body was able to deal with this acute illness, and you wanted to make sure that you enjoyed your time away. It was the time of your life, right? Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So did this acute illness ultimately stay as an acute illness that your body managed, or did your symptoms continue to develop and become something more?
So ultimately, it was pretty good for a while. I ended up making it through the year with just some minor things here and there. And then I came back to America, and about 6 months later is when it ended up becoming crazy, and it became not suppressed anymore at all.
Okay, so talk about how long after you said it was 6 months after you had gotten back that you got sick?
Yeah, around there, between like 6 months to, yeah, almost a year.
So what was going on in your life at that time? Were there any high stress events? Were you having any struggles in school? Were there any personal problems? What was going on that may have been immunosuppressive or immune disrupting at that time?
Yeah, I was living a pretty normal life. I mean, nursing school in general was pretty hard, and I was also working a full-time job on the side of it. And so I was definitely not taking care of my body in the sense of sleeping and eating and doing all of the right things. However, I think that I had just gotten maybe some virus or something that had just kickstarted it, because I got extremely violently ill and had been throwing up for almost 3 days straight of just pretty much straight bile, and had a really high fever, and was probably one of the sickest times I've ever been. So I think that was the moment where it disrupted my immune system and it all came out.
Now, do you think it's possible that perhaps you were bitten by a tick again and that you were just now reacting to a second tick bite or a reinfection, or do you think it was something different?
It's possible. I personally think that I got bit when I was in Europe at the time. And then I think that this virus just hit me so hard that that was almost just a trigger. My body was at its lowest, and it all kind of built up from there.
So how did your symptoms develop from the time that you had this, 3-day throwing up everything, include only left only with bile? How did your symptoms develop from there?
Yeah, so I ended up going into the ER. And when I went into the ER, they thought I had appendicitis. So they did all the scans and everything, and everything turned up normal from there. But was still throwing up like crazy. I mean, it was constant all day, every day. I wasn't getting any fluids in. And my stomach had blown up to the point where it looks like I was 8 months pregnant. And it was so crazy that they discharged me and said that they thought I had the flu, but they also said, I think you need to follow up tomorrow if things aren't getting better with a outside like urgent care, basically, to see what else is going on.
And how'd that go for you?
It was horrible. So I went to this urgent care the next day, and I was still throwing up. My stomach was still so blown up. It looked like I was 8 months pregnant. And I went in, and they looked at all my lab work that they had done in the ER. They looked at my scans, and everything had come back normal. So they decided to do a pelvic exam. And when they did the pelvic exam, I basically flew off the table. It hurt so bad. And at that point, they had basically said, oh, we figured it out. You have pelvic inflammatory disease.
Which is what?
Pelvic inflammatory disease is an infection. Basically, a lot of times it stems from an STD that hasn't been treated, and the bacteria has expanded it basically and create this huge inflammatory response, and can be really dangerous and can cause infertility and all these other things. And at the time, I had told them this had been actually over the next week since I'd been to the ER. And so at the time they said, well, you must have been sexually active in the last like 2 weeks. And I had said, no, I barely can get out of bed. I am so sick. There's no way that this has happened. This would be really crazy if this is what it is, because there's no way. And they pretty much wrote me off and said, all the signs and symptoms are here. I feel like you are embarrassed to talk about this. However, unfortunately, this is what it is. And it's a pretty massive course of antibiotics that we're going to need to send you home on. we will do your swabs and it will show us if you come back with an STD or not. However, unfortunately, I know that this is a hard thing to talk about, but we need you to be honest, and this is what it is, and do the treatment.
All right, so now let's talk about the young nurse who's now being treated in the Western medical system. She goes to the ER and they tell her there's nothing wrong with her. They tell her to follow up with another doctor. You go to the next medical facility, and you're now called a liar. So how does that make you feel as a student of the system that you were so invested in during the entirety of your life?
It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Being on the other side of it, I don't feel like I have seen anyone treat a patient like this. However, now that I've been the patient, there's no way that there's not people being treated this way, And so for me, it was a huge wake up call and a huge demeaning moment in my life where I felt like, I don't know, it just kind of takes away everything from you. I went home, I was feeling so sick, I couldn't even think. And then for them to put this on me, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm bad. Something's bad, and I'm just going to do what they say, get through it. And I'm embarrassed, and let's get through it. But it was horrible.
So you have this physically traumatic event, or physical traumatic event. You now are suffering from emotional trauma because of the way you're being treated by the doctors and the nurses and the staffing and the staff at the medical facility. And I'd have to think that, for somebody who is so invested in the medical system, somebody who want to be a nurse her entire life, who's now studying nursing, who wants to become a nurse, that this medical trauma had to be a little bit more severe, because in addition to you just being called a liar, everything that you believed in and everything you were working toward had to sort of begin to crumble for you.
Yeah, that was definitely the beginning of the crumbling moment. And as crazy as it sounds, that wasn't even the worst of the crumbling moment with the Western medicine. That was truly only the beginning of it. But
right.
Yeah.
So obviously we need you to share with us. So let's go through the chronology. What in total, by the way, before you got your diagnosis, how many different doctors and medical facilities did you go to where you did not receive a Lyme disease diagnosis?
Yeah, I truly lost count of the doctors I saw. I saw multiple doctors in Portland because that's where I went to college. And then I moved back to Nevada after I had graduated nursing school to work as a nurse. And so I began seeing doctors in Nevada, in Reno. And I would say at least 15 doctors of them would be relevant to the case, but I had been sent to Stanford. I was sent to all sorts of different doctors before anything was found.
All right, so outline for us the different doctors that you went to see, and what diagnostic testing did you do, and what diagnoses did you receive?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's probably a little bit different than some other people because of my Western medicine background. I think even though I was feeling all of this trauma, I still wanted to trust it so bad that I went through a lot of things I probably should not have agreed to. But when I first got sick in Portland, I ended up going to see a GI specialist and a gynecologist because of the possible pelvic inflammatory disease. And so those two doctors, I'd been back and forth for a while. And then the gynecologist had decided maybe I had endometriosis. So I actually went through a laparoscopic surgery in Portland at the very beginning of this to see if anything was going on. Unfortunately, they had said they had found a possible adhesion, nothing really that could point to anything that was going on. So I went through all of that. And then when I went to Reno, I ended up seeing a GI specialist, another gynecologist, and another surgeon that the other surgeon had actually sent me to. And so I had been going back and forth through all three of them for a really long time, with them also sending me to other doctors in their own practice because they weren't sure what was going on. So it was I was just bouncing around from doctor to doctor in each practice because no one really knew and they wanted to send me to someone else who might have an answer. But I got another laparoscopic surgery in Nevada because they felt like the surgeon hadn't looked close enough in Portland. There had to be something because they felt like my stomach, there was no way my stomach could be as big and distended and as hard as it was without having some sort of blockage. So I went through another surgery. I went through multiple MRIs. I went through, it's called an MRCP, where they thought, because I previously had my gallbladder out in high school, they thought maybe there was something still there from my gallbladder, and maybe the sphincter that is near the gallbladder was not working correctly. So I went through a whole series of that. And then I went through multiple CTs and endoscopy, colonoscopy. I mean, any sort of GI test, you name it, I had it. Any sort of gynecological test, you name it, I had it. My liver enzymes were skyrocketed and they weren't sure why. So I went through a whole bunch of series of tests for that. I exhausted all sorts of Western medicine testing, basically.
So now one of the things that we all see with Western medicine is that we are led to believe that if we hand our health over to our doctor will be able to diagnose what's wrong with us, give us a treatment, and we will get better, right? That's how they hold themselves out. You were somebody who was being trained to hold yourself out that way. So you fully expected, right, that you'd be able to find a doctor who would be able to diagnose you and, you know, and not have to do all kinds of experimental procedures and not have all kinds of tubes put in various parts of your body. And yet nobody gives you a diagnosis, right?
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
So how long did you go with these symptoms developing before you finally got a diagnosis?
About 2.5 years.
And what was happening in your life during those 2.5 years? Meaning, were there other people in your life who were questioning whether or not you were sick? First of all, I mean, did family members or friends think that perhaps maybe you were a little dramatic and you really weren't sick? Maybe you were, assuming the symptoms that you were studying. I mean, how are things going with your social circle?
Yeah, I mean, there's never a good time to be sick, but I truly feel like this was a pivotal moment in my life where so many different things were happening, where I'm graduating college, I'm trying to start the career that I had always dreamed of and trying to do all these things. And I was just so unwell. So at the time, I was trying to get into the pediatric intensive care unit, which is a really intense job. And, it takes so much focus and time and energy and heart towards the whole thing. And so I was in the middle of that, and I have an extremely supportive family, and I really appreciate everything that they have ever done for me. But I think I am a pretty independent person. And also for me, when I don't have answers and I admit that I'm going through something, it almost makes it worse. And so I was kind of in this weird part where I have all of these people trying so hard to support me and love me, but I just needed to do it and get through it myself and figure out what was going on and figure it out so I could get into the career that I dreamed of and start my life that I dreamed of.
So how were your symptoms interfering with your ability to pursue this dream career?
It was really bad. I was so exhausted. I remember as a nurse starting off, you have to work night shift, which already is a huge trigger on all parts of your body, And so I was really sick, but I had gotten this job, and who turns down their dream job, So I started the dream job, and I remember I was so sick, I couldn't make it 10 minutes of a drive home anytime or there. I would have to stop every 5 minutes, and I would take a nap, and then I would make it to work. And then when I would come home, I would do the same thing. And then to get out of bed, I couldn't get out of bed. I literally had to roll myself off the bed and fall to the ground to wake myself up and be like, okay, you can do this. After you get through this shift, you'll be able to rest again, and then you can do this again, and we'll figure this out.
So what's going on in your social life? Did you have a social life at all? Were you so sick that the only thing you could do is get to work, get home, and get to work the next day?
I did. To my own downfall, I unfortunately am an extreme go-getter, and I am not good at saying no to anything. So my friends are a huge part of my life. And so for me, my life really revolves around my social life, kind of along with my career. But at the time, I was really trying to juggle it all still, and I would still go try to hang out with my friends. But my friends recently, one of my best friends recently, she was talking to me, and she was like, Emily, I remember back when we were hanging out when you were really sick, and she's like, you would come to everything because you were so nervous about missing out on it. Like your FOMO was so extreme, but I would see you in the corner just sleeping on the couch. Like you would get there and you would try to be there so badly. Like you wanted to be there so badly and you were so dead. You would just be asleep over in the corner, but you felt like at least you were doing what you could. And that's really how it was.
All right. So you're really sick. You're starting a new job. There's a lot of stress there because you're the queen of FOMO. You were still going out even though you were really sick. You're sleeping in the corner rather than missing out, right? And you're just getting sicker and you're getting sicker and you're getting sicker. So what do? I mean, how do you finally get to a place where you get diagnosed?
Yeah, it was just so much. It got to a point where I was throwing up so much that the doctors were like, I don't actually know what's going on, but we might have to put a feeding tube in, like it's so bad. And my friend, a lady I had nannied for in college, she had Lyme disease in the past. And she had reached out to me previously about it and said, hey, I think you should look into this. But I had all my faith in Western medicine. I had all my faith that they would figure out what it was. And I had mentioned Lyme disease once or twice, and there wasn't really anything that went with them. So at this point, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and saying, you know what? I don't care how far off anything seems at this point. I need to do something. And so I had reached out to a naturopathic doctor in Reno.
Wait a minute. This Western trained nurse is now reaching out to a naturopathic doctor?
Yes. And I hear the questioning behind it because I had actually been transferred to Stanford Hospital and right before this. And when I was transferred there, my liver enzymes were off the roof. There was just so much going on. And when I went there, the doctor had said, gosh, I have no idea what's going on, but we're going to keep seeing you. We're going to keep doing this, all these things. And I had asked him to test me for Lyme disease. And so he did, and it came back negative.
Okay, let's pause there. Let's pause there for a second, Emily, because you did reference this Lyme issue, right? So when's the first time you thought of Lyme, and who's the first doctor you brought that up to?
Yeah. So it was my friend who I nannied for had brought it up to me multiple times during my journey. And I had kind of thrown it off, I said, oh yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like they would do all this stuff.
So that's where it came from, right? None of the doctors that you were treating with ever even mentioned it to you. It was somebody in the sister science world, right? Matt and I talk about it all the time. Like when I was a young man working out in the gym, you'd have somebody come up to you and say, bro, you should be doing X, right? And we used to call it that bro science, right? Well, we're seeing a lot of that here in the Lyme world, where people who have Lyme disease or family members of people who have Lyme disease are generally better at diagnosing Lyme disease than the Western doctors that you're treating with. And that's what you had here, right? You had someone come up to you at sister science and say, I think you have Lyme.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And she's the one who all along had said it. And so when I was transferred to Stanford, I still was thinking, oh my gosh, these specialists of Stanford Hospital who know everything should at least be able to say, hey, maybe this is a thing or not, So I had them test me, and they did. I don't even know what the test was at the time, but it was some blood test that was not the ones that are that we know better now. And so it came back negative. And so I was like, oh no, I'm bummer. That's not what it is, but it's not Lyme. But then I had that moment where I looked in the mirror and I was like, you know what? She had told me, she said, there's multiple tests. Why don't you go see a naturopath? And I was like, yeah, I think I just have to do whatever it is and just see how it goes.
Okay, so you're failed by at least 15 clinicians who failed to diagnose you with anything that you were suffering from. And now you're failed by a Western test that you had taken as a result of someone seeing you symptomatically who could see that you were suffering from Lyme disease, but you came back negative for Lyme disease with the Western test, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So in desperation, the gal who is invested in Western medicine now pivots over to a non-traditional doctor, and what happens?
Yeah, I was scared, honestly, to be honest, which I am embarrassed about now that I've gone through everything, but I was nervous. I didn't know anything about naturopath or naturopathic medicine or anything. So I went to this doctor and they were so nice and they went through my whole history. They went through everything. My appointment was over an hour long, which was incredible to me because, you know, in Western medicine, you have a 30-minute appointment where you're trying to rush out every one of your symptoms, talk about what you're going to do, everything. And so this appointment was incredible. And I sat there thinking, after all of this, if they can't figure this out, I don't think anyone can. And so they did all of the tests. It was extremely expensive. I mean, I spent a fortune on it. And they ended up doing the IGeneX test along with the co-infections test as well. And I came back positive for Lyme and positive for the other co-infections as well. But however, at this point, I mean, you've set the background up pretty nicely. All I know is Western medicine. I'm still really skeptical of this. I'm like, my Stanford doctor just told me I'm negative, and I'm coming to this naturopathic doctor I don't know anything about. And all of a sudden I'm positive for all of these things. And so I was really nervous about it. And I reached out to my friend and she had explained the whole reasoning behind why the one test could be negative and the other one's positive and all the things. And they had talked about starting a treatment course and everything, but I was really hesitant. And I went to bed that night after I got my results, and I know I talked about that rash earlier in this, but I forgot about that rash after, 3 odd years. And so I went home that night and I went to bed and was just so distraught. And I woke up in the middle of the night and it was probably the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my life. I woke up with this memory of this rash I had in Europe. And I was like, that is so weird because everyone talks about this bullseye rash of a Lyme disease. And I immediately went to my phone because I had sent a picture to my mom because I was in a panic. I was like, Mom, I had this rash for 5 weeks. What the heck? How do I get rid of this? So I looked up the picture of what I had sent her, and it was a perfect bullseye rash. And in that moment, I just started crying. And I was like, this is it. I can believe this. And now I have full faith in everything this doctor is telling me.
Emily, what I find so beautiful about this story is you talking to Rich, describing the process of you starting to be able to trust your own gut or stick to your gut, right? And that's a theme that you've now carried forward and we're going to get to in a little bit, but we're seeing it already. This is the beginning of you sticking to your gut and getting to health where you are today. And it's just really exciting to see that transformation. I know I'm getting way ahead here, but I also just want to take a moment to stop because, of course, everybody knows we do some research on our guests before we interview people. And I'm looking at your social media now on Instagram. And of course, your handle is Stick to Your Gut, right? And you have some really cool content on here. So you talked about some of the GI issues that you've had. And I just want to encourage everybody listening to this to check you out on social media at Stick to Your Gut, because I'm already inspired on so many meals that are going to be Lyme-friendly meals to make for myself. Like my favorite one is this crispy sesame cauliflower. I'm like, oh my goodness, right? Your gluten-free peanut butter muffins. I mean, I'm just scrolling and I'm like, wow. So total side note, but so you finally get your diagnosis, you're questioning it, you remember the rash, and you realize I really have Lyme disease, right? So I have to ask, do you think that you remembering this rash was just something in your subconscious that came to light? Do you think there was some sort of spiritual element to this, with your faith? It just seems very coincidental that you get diagnosed, that night you wake up from sleep and you remember a rash from 3 years ago, you look at it and it's a bullseye rash, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that coincidence, quote unquote?
I really think about it almost every day. I don't know. I grew up pretty religious. I grew up in Catholic schools. I believe in a higher being. I've gone through multiple different things, of being really religious, kind of stepping back a little bit. There's been so much in the world lately where I feel like you question everything at different times. And so for me that night, I don't know what it was. I do believe there was something special about it and there was some crazy part of it. It is so coincidental and so beyond a normal thing, and it was exactly what I needed, which is the craziest thing. For some people, they would have been able to get through it and believe what they were told right then and there when they got those results. But this was so intentionally towards what I needed that I think about it every day. I don't know what it was, but it was what I needed at the time.
So Emily, I want to go into where we are with Rich right now, but I have to backtrack because a lot of things that you talked about with Rich that I want to explore a little bit deeper. Because one of the things that we hear often on this podcast, and it's really Rich and I can't relate, so I'm going to ask you some probably weird questions that hopefully you can clarify for me. Because so many people in the Lyme community end up with an endometriosis diagnosis, and they have problems with, female issues. So you mentioned that you were constantly going to the gynecologist. You were misdiagnosed with endometriosis. You were having some laparoscopic surgeries because you had your gallbladder removed to see if there was problems there. What are your thoughts on the overlap between endometriosis, gynecological problems, and Lyme disease? Because it seems so prevalent, so common, where people are debilitated with endometriosis and have debilitating periods where they're literally out of commission, in pain, in bed, not being able to function because of the periods. Now, is that something you can relate to? And if so, give us some insight into that from your perspective.
I think that Lyme is able to attack so many things. I think for women, our hormones are a huge part of how our body reacts to things. And when you're under that much stress, I think one of the things that happens is your hormones get out of balance. There's so much inflammation, and that's really a big part of endometriosis. And so I don't know, I can't say like from a doctor's standpoint, the actual science of it all, but I do think there's a huge overlap with that. And I mean, we just see it with women all the time, women who have different dietary needs who haven't figured that out yet. And there's chronic inflammation, or people with arthritis. People have a hard time with their periods. They have a hard time in general with cramps and bloating and all of the things. And I think it all relates just to how your body reacts to things. And I think Lyme is so opportunistic that it really hits that for different women.
Emily, again, not to get too personal, did you experience painful periods? Were you experiencing endometriosis? Were you having problems like that when you were really sick?
Yeah, I weighed probably 100 pounds and I'm 5'2", and I was having such bad periods that they couldn't stop the bleeding at all. And I was in bed almost crying because it hurt so bad. And they were trying to put in an IUD because they had to stop the periods. They were double dosing me on birth controls, which, I mean, gosh, that's so much hormones for a small person. And, looking back again, I just did what I thought was right because the doctors were telling me that's what I was supposed to do. But yes, I experienced all of that. And it is truly traumatic to go through that as a woman. It's not a good thing.
So Emily, and I don't want to go too far ahead, but I think it's important to speak about here, as you started to heal and, today, are you experiencing nearly as difficult symptoms from, or pain from periods and endometriosis symptoms, et cetera, now that you've been able to heal and modify your diet accordingly in a way that is best fit for your body?
No, I actually don't have any issues with my periods or any of the gynecological issues at all, which is pretty incredible. And I'm pretty blessed to be able to say. I do still struggle with GI stuff every once in a while, but I have it under control where it's just minor issues here and there. And for the most part, I feel so beyond lucky that I have been able to get where I am.
And I think it's really important because so many people, one of our good friends, Claire Dalton, who's been on this podcast, she just recently co-hosted with us, and she was sort of dealing with these extreme endometriosis symptoms. She was debilitated for, a week every month because of her period. And she just had a breakthrough in the last few months. And she's been sharing what's been working for her. But I think people listening need to know that that's not something that you have to live with forever. Once you get chronic Lyme disease, you can overcome that. And I think, Emily, you are a perfect example, and Claire is a perfect example of that. Keep on fighting, don't give up, and you can have a breakthrough and get a normal life back, right? So I think that's really powerful to talk about. The other thing I wanted to question you on that you talked about with Rich was, you mentioned you had your gallbladder removed. And there were some questions as to maybe there could be complications there, and they did some exploratory surgeries to see if there was anything going on. From what I understand, and you definitely can clarify more than I can, I believe the gallbladder really is like the storage pouch for bile, right? And bile, we know, is so important for detoxing. It helps your liver in detoxing. So as these things come into your liver and you're detoxing heavy metals, mycotoxins from mold, everyday toxins, microplastics, etc., all of these things need your liver to be working properly with adequate bile to flush it through your liver and into your GI system and out of your body. Do you think that there's any connection between your gallbladder removal surgery and possibly not being able to detox and maybe being connected to why you got so sick? Or do you think that I'm looking too much into this from a medical standpoint? Because obviously you were a nurse and you know far more than I do about this topic.
Absolutely. I actually really do. I don't know medically for sure if a doctor would agree or not. However, I think it was right when I had started my treatment, I was killing off all this bacteria, and that's when my liver enzymes had skyrocketed. And I really do believe that I was not detoxing. I've never been a self-care detox person before any of this. And so I truly wasn't doing any of that stuff that everyone was saying you should do while you're getting treated. And I do feel like it had a huge play in the role, but I can't say for certain scientifically if it did.
And before you were really sticking with your gut, you mentioned that all these doctors are basically telling you, hey, you have an STD, you have an infection, you need antibiotics, hardcore antibiotics, go home. And one of the things you said that made me really sad was that doctors simply just didn't believe you. And that resulted in medical trauma. And Richard, you touched on this, but I want to explore this deeper because I feel like medical trauma can prevent you from taking steps forward. I think about my own journey. And I remember when I was treated very poorly by a neurologist when I was having severe neurological symptoms, it made me anxious and afraid from that trauma to take steps forward to seek other doctors to help me because I was afraid they'd treat me the same way. So give us a little more about this medical trauma you experienced from all these doctors and how it impacted ultimately your diagnosis and maybe tips and tricks you can recommend to people that are dealing with that now to overcome that trauma to expedite a diagnosis of any illness.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest part of all of this for any person who's going through not only Lyme disease, but any illness that is unknown at that point in their life. You know your body. And so I truly felt like doctors knew my body better than me at this point in my life. And so I was getting gaslight. And, I don't actually think that it was anything intentional of doctors. I think sometimes when you don't know the answer, which I can relate to a little bit as a nurse, sometimes when you don't know the answer, you feel like you have to say something or you have to defer to something. And so maybe that's where some of these doctors were coming from, where they felt like they had to give some sort of answer at the point at that time. But, that was the first time that I had truly felt like I was not that they weren't listening to me, or I was getting gaslit by doctors and stuff when that was happening. But throughout my journey, it had been over and over again where, it was times where I wasn't eating and doctors would say, well, it sounds like maybe you just aren't trying the right things. And I would be like, every little thing I put in my body, I throw up immediately. If you could tell me what to put in my body and I will do it right now, like whatever it is, you tell me and I will do it. But it was things like that. And then it was cases when I was in the ER because I wasn't able to eat. My stomach was so big and it hurt so bad that they were saying that they thought I was a drug seeker, which even in my emergency room visits, I refused narcotics because those make GI symptoms worse. And so as a nurse, I knew that. And it wasn't a pain thing that bugged me. I mean, I can withstand a certain amount of pain, and I feel like I have a pretty high tolerance, but it was just that I wanted to know what was wrong. Like, I didn't want them to give me pain medicine. I just wanted them to figure out what was wrong. And even in those instances, they would turn me away saying, oh, I think you're a young pain seeker and all the things. And it was times where kind of going ahead of myself, but I ended up getting a Lyme carditis and I couldn't walk to my kitchen without literally so short of breath. I was hyperventilating and my heart was just racing and I would have to sit down and they would say, no, I think you're just having these crazy anxiety attacks. And, it was stuff where I truly feel for people now that I'm on the other side of it. It makes me really sad that I am a part of the medical field that is maybe potentially causing this for people. But yeah, I think hearing other people's stories too, so many people are being told that they're wrong and that this isn't what their body is feeling. And after I had learned that I'm not wrong and that I do have this illness and all these things that I was feeling were real, I really learned you just have to believe in yourself and you have to stick to your gut. And when you know something's not right, it's not right. And don't let other people who don't know what's going on say otherwise.
And what I like most about what you're sharing with us, Emily, is that yes, there are times when the medical community will fail us and we have to stick to our guts, right? But you are offering a service now, which we're going to get to, that sort of makes up for that lack of ability for the medical community to help us. So you are a nurse, you are a Western medical practitioner who then had to evolve, which we're going to get to this, to really embrace Eastern medicine to heal. And now you're helping other people fill the shortcomings of the medical community to get to where you are today, right? So that's really going to come full circle in a bit, but that's the really cool part about your story that I really can't wait to get to and share with when Rich jumps back in. But again, before we get into your treatment and the diagnosis Rich brought us to, let's talk about your misdiagnoses and your symptoms, because you touch on some of your symptoms, but I want to make sure we hit all of your symptoms and your misdiagnoses. I mean, you had this PID, STD misdiagnosis. You had the sphincter of OD dysfunction, MRCP, right? I'm just going through the list here that you'd given us for this podcast. You had bowel obstructions with 2 exploratory laparoscopies. You had Lyme carditis. You had IBS, depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, GERD, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's, H. pylori. It goes on and on and on and on, right? So did you ever believe any of these misdiagnoses and accept that as the root cause? And in addition to that, give us an idea of the full breadth of your symptoms prior to getting your diagnosis. Because obviously you were really sick, and I want to make sure we have a true picture of how sick you were.
I believed everything. I mean, every time that they told me something, I believed it. And I was like, okay, perfect. This is it. Let's deal with it. This is it. And then they would say, okay, well, this is the treatment. And I would try the treatment. I went on so many different medications, which looking back, I wish, I had done things so differently. But yeah, I was full throttle. What they told me, I was ready for it. I was ready to try the treatment. I was ready to do it. And when nothing worked, that was when I was like, absolutely not one of these 20 different things that they have diagnosed me with were correct. And at that point, I was just realizing they don't know, no one knows. And none of these things are all just a shot in the dark. And we're just trying different things, but I need to stop just going with it just because they're telling me.
And Emily, just give us an idea of your symptoms. So obviously you had severe GI distress. You couldn't eat. You were losing weight because you couldn't eat. You had cardiac symptoms. You had all kinds of other stuff going on. Did you have neurological symptoms? Were you in pain? Obviously you had fatigue and you said you were sleeping all the time, but give us an idea of the full breadth of your symptoms.
I had so it all started with my GI, and GI was the first and major, it's definitely been probably the biggest part of my journey is my GI system. But with the GI system, then I started having really horrible joint pain, fatigue like no other. I mean, it wasn't just I was tired. It felt like someone was holding weights onto my eyelids, and I would literally hold my eyes open just by slits trying to talk to people sometimes. I could not keep them open. I would sleep for over 24 hours straight and wake up and would roll myself out of bed just to try to make it to the kitchen to drink some bone broth. I couldn't keep any food down. My the Lyme carditis part started, and that was when it was really scary for me because I was so short of breath. My heart was racing. I couldn't do anything. It was, I mean, it was, yeah, you name it, the symptoms really full throttle, but it was, I mean, it was different times when each thing was the worst, and it was with different parts of the treatment process where some things became really prevalent and others less prevalent. But throughout the whole journey, I would say those were probably the worst of all the symptoms.
But it sounds like it really affected every body system you had. I mean, your GI symptoms were the worst for you as from a symptomatic standpoint, but you had neurological symptoms. You had anxiety, you had depression, so you did have some neurological symptoms, which I believe were a result of Lyme, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, for a long time, tried to fight that so hard. I definitely had the neurological, I would have brain fog, and it already makes you depressed when you already have that brain fog. You don't feel like yourself. But I have always been just I grew up with three brothers, and I grew up where you figure things out, you do it, you get over it, you work through it. And so for me, even throughout this whole journey, when I'm that sick, I'm like, no, figure this out, get through it, get over it. You can't be upset, you can't be depressed, you just have to work through it. And it was only after my Lyme treatment when I actually started getting better, when my therapist had brought to light how bad I really was mentally at the time.
And of course, you had Lyme in your heart, you had Lyme carditis, and it also, with the Hashimoto's and the autoimmune component of this, you were having your immune system be attacked as well by the bacteria. So you're having these autoimmune complications. So it really was affecting your entire body. So I'm curious, when you got your diagnosis from IGeneX with this naturopath, and I also have to say, I don't believe it was a coincidence, right? I mean, you're this Western nurse, you're really resistant to natural medicine. If it weren't for this friend who you were nannying for in college, pushing you aggressively, then getting the test, then having the memory of the rash, and now all these things lining up properly for you to get a diagnosis, here you are. So you land in this position. When you got the IGeneX results, did you test for anything besides Lyme disease? Because I wonder if you had Babesia as well, because a lot of that shortness of breath can be overlap between Lyme carditis and possibly Babesia. So did you test for co-infections? And if so, did you have any positives on the co-infection spectrum when you did that with IGeneX?
Yeah, I had positive Bartonella and Babesia. And Bartonella was the one that hit my stomach so hard. And Babesia, like you said, was the carditis, the neuro symptoms more, and the fatigue more.
All right, so now you finally believe you have Lyme disease. You go back to the naturopath, you accept the diagnosis. What is the first course of treatment you go on for Lyme?
This is where it was pretty hard for me, because I had finally accepted it. I had finally gotten on board with the naturopathic medicine, and he had started me on a treatment of IV antibiotics, and he went full throttle on it, which at the time I was ready for. I was like, let's kick it, let's do it. I finally know what's going on. Let's get through it, And so I started these IV antibiotics, and oh my gosh, I honestly thought I was gonna die. I was so sick. I was crying, and I called my friend who I nannied for, and she was like, you need to come see my doctor. I just don't know about this. And she had explained the Herxheimer reaction and everything. And at this point, the doctor that was treating me at the time in Reno, he hadn't explained any of that. And I don't want to say anything bad against him at all. I don't think he was meaning anything bad. But the way that he had started the treatment was just absolutely not right for me. And so I went through a really dark period right after he started it, where I almost regressed in my progress of going to get treated, which is really horrible because it took me so long to get to that point. And so I then went to the doctor my friend had recommended, and that was the turning point where she had immediately said, oh my gosh, absolutely not. No way at this point in time, with how sick you are, you could tolerate what you were getting thrown at. And so I changed my treatment course from there with my new doctor in Portland.
Okay, Emily, so refresh my memory. The doctor you found initially who gave you the aggressive IV antibiotics, how did you find that doctor again?
He was a random naturopathic doctor in Reno who agreed to do the IGeneX testing.
Okay. And do you recall what IV antibiotics that you were on? Was it Rocephin? Was it a combination of IV antibiotics?
He started off with Rocephin, and then after the Rocephin had hit so hard, he actually changed me to, I think it was maybe clindamycin, but I would have to think about it more. But he had changed me to another one where I continuously got worse. And then that's when I reached out to the other doctor.
And how long was this? How long were you on the IV antibiotics for before you made the decision to go to your friend's doctor who she recommended?
About a month.
Okay. So now you're at a point where you're really sticking to your gut and you're going through this transformation. You're like, all right, something's not right. I'm getting worse. I'm going to cut it short after a month and I'm moving to another doctor. And you do this, you go see this doctor, and she tells you, oh my goodness, this is not good. You're that sick. You need to start more gradually. So what is her approach in contrast, in comparison to your doctor that you found who would do the IGeneX test?
She was similar. I love the way she explains it, where she says, we have this entire toolkit. We have Western medicine, we have Eastern medicine, We have all of these other things that we need to pull from evenly. You know, it's a give and take on both sides. And so she did a mutual approach where she still did antibiotics for me, which to me, some people, I don't think that goes well for. For me, I think it did because mentally, I still have this almost innate background of this is the right choice, you know? And so she did some antibiotics for me along with different herbs and different detoxing and acupuncture and all of the other things that go along with it. But she did do a course of different antibiotics with me as well, but they were oral. And we met constantly to talk about the different reactions I was having in regards to Herxheimer's and stuff.
Okay, so a couple follow-ups on that. So what oral antibiotics were you on? It sounds like you were on a combination. Do you recall any of them, you know, the specific types of antibiotics?
I was on a pretty intense combination. Unfortunately, I was allergic to doxycycline. So initially I couldn't go on the doxycycline. I had, oh gosh, I'll have to think. I won't be able to give you the timeline of which ones were together at the time, but I went through minocycline, clarithromycin, clindamycin. The big one that was really intense that actually I think was probably the most significant for me though was one that treated Bartonella, and it was called no, I was just listening to one of the other podcasts with one of your other hosts, and she had gone on it too. I'll have to think about it, but it's a pretty intense one that does affect your liver sometimes. And I was pretty nervous about taking it, but it was actually what really got me through the Bartonella.
Not Dapsone, right?
No, that was newer actually. When I first got it treated, they didn't really know much about that helping it. And towards the end of my treatment, my doctor almost put me on that, but no.
Okay. Well, you know what?
I'll think about it.
If it doesn't come up, we'll drop it in the show notes. So don't feel too much pressure, because we could always just put it in the show notes if we need to. So I have to dig even deeper, right? So you're on all these oral antibiotics. One of them was really helpful, and we're going to get that either later or drop it in the show notes. And you're constantly communicating with your doctor to respond to the Herx, just to make sure you're not having too much of an extreme Herx reaction, which can be obviously detrimental to your health. You mentioned that you were on herbs and detox protocols as well, but give us an idea as to what specific herbs and detox tools you were using. And at this point, were you also introducing dietary changes? Because we know that's a really big part of your life now. So is that introduced to your life now, or does that come later on in the story?
Yeah, yes, the diet stuff was really big at this point in my time. My doctor had done the allergy testing through my blood, and she had really honed in on the fact that my diet was extremely important, which at the time I looked at her and I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I can't even put anything in my body. How do you want me to change my diet? I'm literally not eating. So what do you want me to do? And she really honed in on it, and she got me on to a diet where I took out gluten, eggs, dairy, corn, and wheat, or I already said wheat. And I started really trying to just get a simple diet where for the first week, I actually only did a powder supplement she gave me that introduced me to food again, basically. And then I went into eating some plain rice. And then I went into eating some plain rice and plain chicken. And then I kind of started bringing things back. But then that's where I really started doing all the research on the nutrition aspect of everything. And that's where I got really into all of that part of it.
That sounds very much in line with the Dr. Roll's diet. And I have to wonder, is it the time when you decided to get I think you are your IIN certified health coach, right? So, and you went and got certified. Did that happen later on, or was this around this time that when you started to study, the role nutrition plays in healing and getting a certification?
That actually happened way later on. I went through all of this stuff and was so interested in it and learned so much about it. And I would talk to my friends and tell them everything and help them with their diets and all the things. And everyone always said, well, why don't you do this for other people? Why don't you go to a program and do this? And I always just said, I don't know, I love it, but it's just something I just want to talk to people about. But then it was only actually in the last 2 years that I really started thinking about actually doing it for other people in the sense of actually like a health coach.
And that's the Integrative Institute for Nutrition is where you studied at later on, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know I gave the acronym and probably everybody's like, what is that? And then I couldn't remember. That's why I had to Google it while you were talking and clarify. So, okay. So now you're taking literally you're going on a powder only diet, then you're doing rice and you're adding in chicken while you're treating with antibiotics and doing other herbs. So what herbs were you on initially when you first started the antibiotics? It sounds like you were doing these things together in parallel. So do you recall the specific herbs you were on? Were they tinctures? Was it homeopathic medicine? Was it stuff, a certain brand that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, it was tinctures. I was on a few other herbs in pill form that I couldn't actually tell you the names of at the time. There were so many that I lost track. But the major herb that really helped me was it's a tincture of CSA. It's Cryptolepis ceto alcornea or something similar to that. Oh, I'll have to Google it so I don't butcher that so much. But that one has been honestly godsend for me. Even when I was able to get off of my antibiotics, that's what I went into a relapse at one point and went back on just the herbs. And that's what really brought me back already. And so those were really important for me.
Emily, is it Woodland Essence CSA, the Cryptolepis Woodland? Because that's like again, there's so many patterns here in this podcast, and Cryptolepis is and even from the studies that are done at Johns Hopkins, the most potent and effective herb at not only killing Lyme disease, but a wide variety of co-infections like Bartonella and Babesia, which you had, right? And Woodland's Essence is one of the brands we hear from people all the time that they use and have great success with. So I think this is another pattern that we're building here, where Cryptolepis is something that helped you overcome Lyme, and then when you had a relapse, it helped you overcome your relapse. So it's really it's an alternative, I think, to antibiotics, but a more natural way where it doesn't do some of the damage that the antibiotics will do as well. So that's the Cryptolepis CSA formula. Now,
yes,
were there any other herbs that you can recall besides Cryptolepis that were helpful? I mean, the tinctures I know are hard because you don't really know what's in them and you're prescribed by your doctor, but do you recall any other herbs specifically that you were on?
No, I think that one was honestly the biggest one for me. That was most vital. The other ones I feel like came in and out, and I don't really remember their names, but that was the biggest one for me.
And from a detox standpoint, what were you doing differently now? So obviously you understood a Herxheimer reaction is because as you're killing not only Lyme, but a wide variety of other pathogens and microbes, your body's not properly removing them from your body. And you have to aid in detoxification, open up your drainage pathways. We hear this all the time, but what were you doing specifically to assist in detoxing to reduce the Herxheimer reactions you were getting?
I went to this wellness spa where they had the infrared sauna, and that was huge for me. I think sweating out all the toxins was really big for me. I was taking a lot of teas. I actually was doing the cupping a lot, which at first, the first time I went in, I was really skeptical. And the first time I did it, I got so sick afterwards, and it all made sense. And I really was just blown away how accurate it was when people talked about it. And so the cupping really helped me, the detox teas. I was doing some vitamin IVs with the glutathione and different things. I think those were kind of the big things I did for detoxing.
So Emily, how long were you on the antibiotics, the herbs, the detox protocols before you started to see symptom relief and ultimately to the point where you were in remission and you felt that you had overcome this illness?
I took antibiotics and the herbs and the detoxing protocol for a year. I went off and felt really good for about 2 months. And my doctor had warned me 2 months is kind of the period where sometimes you'll revert back. And I had gone on a run and came back, and my body felt like I was going to die again. And I almost cried. I was just so devastated. I knew immediately it was back. And I was so scared to go back on the antibiotics. And so I actually did go back on the antibiotics, but this was during COVID. So I went back on the antibiotics, and then I got hit with COVID. And at the same time that I got hit with COVID, I ended up getting this horribly opportunistic infection in your gut called C. diff. And my doctor had explained it to me that my body was so depleted with the COVID, and I was so sick. I ended up getting breathing treatments. I was so sick from it. And they said that the C. diff had just taken over because it was so opportunistic. And at that point, there were no options for me to stay on antibiotics. And so I went off
Emily,
the
I'm
antibiotics.
going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just really want to point something out here. So you had a relapse. Lyme came back full force. You start to go on antibiotics to address it. You get hit with COVID. So now you have a relapse of Lyme and co-infections, and then you're hit with COVID. Now you have COVID, and then you develop C. diff, a really bad, I think it's really an antibiotic-resistant infection. Is that what C. diff is?
Correct. Yeah. And that's the fear of taking so many antibiotics.
So you really have, like, your body is now just destroyed. You have reactivation of Lyme and co-infections, you have C. diff, and you have COVID. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because you're here today, obviously, and you're doing better and you're in remission, right? And then you're helping other people. So I just want to shed light on the fact that there is hope. I mean, you were just really, every single thing that could go wrong went wrong for you, and you bounced back. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just always like these stories of hope and inspiration that you're giving us today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, exactly. And after that, I wasn't able to go back on the antibiotics, but I had been on them for a period where I had gotten a little bit better. And so I kept up with the herbs, and I kept up with my detox protocol, and I was really strict on all of my GI issues. I was really strict on my diet and my supplements, and just healing from the rest of areas of my life. And so I ended up being able to get through the C. diff and COVID, and didn't have to go back on antibiotics. And I have actually been in remission ever since. So I have been very lucky, and there definitely is hope.
How long did that take, Emily? From the time you were hit with this trio, this perfect storm, how long did it take for you to overcome that using herbs and detox tools?
I would say it was about 4 to 6 months to feel the full recovery. I think after being through it already a little bit, I think I was a little bit ahead of the game, being able to know the things that I needed to do first and the more important things and all of that. And so it was a little bit quicker of a recovery for me, but I think ultimately it took about 6 months to really feel all the way better.
Because once again, you were sticking to your gut, and you knew exactly what you had to do, and you did it right away, right? And here's that pattern now. So you went from not trusting yourself at all to starting to realize I have to trust myself, to really sticking to your gut, and now being wholly dependent on yourself and your body signals and making these decisions, which is why obviously you overcame this, I think, so quickly. So talk to us about now, was there anything else? I just don't want to miss anything. We talked about a lot. Was there anything else that we missed that you felt was an important piece of your healing journey that we didn't discuss from a treatment standpoint, or a modality, or a detox tool, et cetera?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. I think those were really the big things. I think my journey had a lot more antibiotic therapy and Western medicine therapy than some of the other people who have recovered from Lyme did. But I think towards the end of it, all of those other treatment modalities that we hear in all of your guys' podcasts of people's stories and everything else that is out there now, I was able to be a part of and learned the importance of them. But yeah, I think those were really the big spots of all of my treatment.
With antibiotics, there's a time and place, and it's a personal decision. I mean, I was on IV antibiotics just like you were, Emily, right? When I was reinfected, I was diagnosed, and I caught it before I was even symptomatic, but I went back on doxycycline again for an acute diagnosis of Lyme and Rocky Mountain spotted fever with herbs. And that was a decision I made. So I don't want to put the message out there that, where antibiotics are completely bad in general, but I think it's a personal decision everybody has to make, right? Do you want to go completely herbal, completely Western, or do you want to do a combination like you did? And we've had guests on that have had success using, one or the other or both, right? And I think it's such a personal decision. We're also bio-individual. And I think that you're just giving us one path to success. And I think your path is a very good path to success. So if you had to look back at your journey, and I always like to think about this with our guests, what would you do differently to shortcut your journey to health and remission? So people that are listening and are still treating and trying to get better, maybe you can give them some guidance and tips to help them shortcut their journey to health like you did.
I think even though it's going to be a little repetitive, stick to your gut. That's the biggest thing for me. I mean, I knew from the very beginning that all of these things were wrong, and I just didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my beliefs of what was going on in my body. I trusted other people's opinions more than my own. And I also I would say just be open to everything. Listen to people's stories because they went through it. And just because we don't have that much research out there for Lyme disease. So for a lot of people, they want to see the research and know what's going to happen if they do these things. But that's not the case with Lyme disease because we just don't have it. It's not accessible. And so sometimes you just have to know that you are thinking the right things, you know your body the best, and if other people have gone through this, then just be open to their ideas of ways that you can heal.
And looking back where you are now, your GI symptoms being the most life-altering symptoms for you, so many people tell us that they can't eat. And one friend comes to mind that I had that from Connecticut, and she just is having a really hard time with eating. She's lost a ton of weight and she has severe GI issues. And there's many of these people that reach out to us on a regular basis. Was there any one thing or combination of things that you found to be the most helpful in alleviating your GI symptoms that you can share with our listeners to give them some guidance or maybe alternatives to what they're doing today to overcome some of these severe GI issues that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think just going full force on it. It seems really daunting to change your diet up completely. And it feels, I mean, for me, I think the hardest part was that I was nervous about the people around me, where I would say, oh, I can't eat all these things. And I would think people would judge me, And for everyone, it's so important that you find what your body is saying no to. So if you're getting sick from certain foods, eliminate them and work on healing your gut. And sometimes you can bring those foods back. Sometimes you feel so much better, it doesn't even matter at that point. And so I feel like diet is so hard because it just feels so daunting to start and change and live with forever. But it's so important. And when you figure out how much better you feel after you do it, you'll realize how important it is.
And I don't mean to keep pushing this issue, so you can definitely push back, but a lot of people tell us that they're just so sensitive they can't eat. And one of the things that people always get accused of is anorexia in the Lyme community. And there's been some suggestions that maybe the Lyme can affect your brain and actually cause anorexia. Other people believe that it's because people get so sick with GI issues they can't eat, and then they get accused of being anorexic. But for those that are listening, and a lot of people that tell us, look, I can't eat anything, so a dietary change is not going to help me. What will you be? And you were there, right? I mean, you had such.
Oh yeah.
Your stomach was so extended you couldn't eat anything, and you got through that. So what was the most effective for you? And you literally couldn't even eat, and diet really was a word that wasn't helpful because you weren't eating, that allowed you to be able to tolerate foods and be able to get a normal diet back. Was it herbs? Was it, what was it that got you through that time when you couldn't even eat anything?
Yeah, I was there. I was there so much. When the first time someone said that to me, I was perplexed. I had no words. You want me to change my diet and that's going to fix me? It's so frustrating almost to hear. It's like, I can't eat anything. Why are you telling me this? But so I really resonate with that completely. But yeah, you know what? It's when it feels like you can't eat anything. Lyme disease causes so much inflammation, and your gut is one of the most important parts of your body, and it is affected so strongly by inflammation. And so when your gut's destroyed, it rejects everything. So I guess for me, the knowledge of knowing that it's not necessarily that I need to change my diet immediately. It's more of we need to heal your gut. And along with that, your diet needs to change. Otherwise, you won't tolerate any food because it's not necessarily all the food that's causing the issues. It's your gut's lining in general. And so for people who feel like they can't eat anything and get almost triggered by hearing, well, it's all diet. Like, don't feel that way because it's not all diet. It's mostly you really have to look at the fact that your gut is sick. And so you have to fix that. And along with that, work on your diet with it. But it's a whole moving process. It takes a long time, and it's a lot of pieces that have to come together, but it's definitely not just a diet piece.
Give us a little more about the gut lining, because as a nurse, obviously you have a really good understanding of this. So you mentioned inflammation is what causes you to have all these food sensitivities and affects your gut, and it's your gut lining. So give us a little more. What does that mean? How does your gut lining and how does inflammation cause the inability to eat and tolerate food?
So your gut has a lining in it. And basically when you're super inflamed and you're throwing things at it that it doesn't like, it's getting really frustrated, in simple terms. And when it is frustrated, it gets a little bit broken and things are able to leak out of it and cause this bloating, this pain, and it causes further breakdown of your lining. So if you don't have the strong, almost like you could say like soldiers, lining your gut, you're just getting broken down constantly. And so you have to take out the triggers that are causing that. And once you take out the triggers, you have to heal that lining so that your soldiers can fight for you and that they can not let these things get through that are going to cause you more pain and bloating and inflammation and the chronic cycle.
So the key for you was starting with this really powder diet, introducing rice, introducing chicken, which is the only things your gut can help while you were healing your gut. But what do you believe helped heal your gut the most? Was it the herbs? What were you doing? Was it some detox protocols? What was it that you felt helped heal your gut while you were on this extremely limited diet? And then as you continue to heal your gut using whatever this was, you were able to eat more and more food. That's the piece that I think I'm missing, is what you feel really helped heal your gut the most and repair your gut lining.
The supplements I was taking were really helpful. Probiotics, for any Lyme patient who's taken any antibiotics, it literally breaks down and removes all of your good flora as well as your bad flora in your gut. So your gut is starting from a ground zero of just no support at all. And so you have to build up those good bacteria. You have to take the right, there's different supplements that can help build up the wall, like the L-glutamine and aloe helps relax, and just a lot of little things. But the biggest thing, the most important thing, is to build that bacteria back up, because your body needs the good bacteria as long as the bad, and that's the harmful part of antibiotics, and that's why doctors don't want you to be on them for that long. But again, for me, I had been on them for a year and a half, so obviously my flora was completely out of whack. And so taking the probiotics and the different supplements that help heal the lining and then start doing the diet was the big thing for me.
So my final question before Rich picks back up with you is, since you're in remission, and obviously you're doing really well, are you doing anything today from a maintenance standpoint? And do you have any plans to do anything differently moving forward with your health, with your supplement, with your lifestyle, et cetera?
I still take my CSA herbs every day. I am working on eventually getting off of them, but I'm slowly working on that. I don't want to go too quick with that, but I am really focusing on keeping my gut intact and doing all the things dietary that I need to do. I'm much more aware of my body and much more aware of what it's telling me. I take breaks when I need to. I rest when I need to. I don't try to overdo it quite as much as I used to. And I think the biggest key is just I'm way more aware and listening to what my body's telling me moving forward.
So let's talk about that, because we're going to now pivot over to the transformational element of your journey, right? And we want to talk about the beautiful elements of your Lyme disease journey. So first, let's talk about what's been beautiful about it for you. How have you changed emotionally and spiritually as a result of going on this journey?
I have changed tremendously. I was growing up, I was a go-getter. I was running on nothing all the time, but I was healthy, and so it worked, and I was young and I could do it. And I never focused on self-care. I ate, my family cooked, we ate homemade meals for dinner every night, but I wouldn't say that I knew anything about nutrition or anything about gut health, or just really had to focus on any of that. And so I think I went through a huge transformation period, but I learned about how you really need to focus on your body. You need to know what you're putting in it. You need to know what it's telling you. You need to know when it's time to rest and take care of yourself. And I personally feel like it was actually a really positive outlook for me that this all happened, just because it really brought to light everything that I just didn't realize before about my body.
All right, so you now are living a more intentional life, right? You're listening to your body tell you that you don't feel good when you're eating crap, so you stop eating crap, right? You're now eating better, right? So that's the first place you're intentional. One of the things that I was hearing during the earlier part of the podcast, and when you were talking with Matt, is that you seem to be the kind of person that was coachable, right? And that might, another word for that, or another set of words for that that may not be as polite, is you're a people pleaser, right? And when you talked about going out with your friends, even though you were really sick and sleeping in the corner on the couch, that sounded to me like you were a people pleaser, right? You want to make sure your friends still liked you and still wanted you to do things, right? When you were doing things that doctors wanted you to do, even though you weren't getting better. One diagnosis, one treatment, you're still sick. Another diagnosis, another treatment, you're still sick. So you were a coachable, or you were being a good patient. But what you were doing is you were ignoring how you felt. You were ignoring your body signals. So talk to us about how you moved away from being this people pleaser, both as a patient and as a friend, and how that was an important part of your journey.
Yeah, 100%. That was a huge part of my journey. I was definitely a people pleaser, and I still struggle with it. I still have to remind myself. But yeah, moving forward, I just really learned that I need to stop looking at what other people are thinking I should be doing, or what other people think I'm feeling, because no one knows what you're feeling. No one knows how bad it is. And especially for people who are somewhat people pleasers, you almost put it out there as if you are okay. You try so hard to be okay that you make yourself look okay. You make yourself still go do all the things. And so, what are people going to think? They don't understand how sick you really feel. So, they don't understand why you're making these decisions on your health that you are. And so, that was probably the biggest part of my journey, is learning that I just need to listen to how I feel. I need to stick to my gut, do the things that are going to make me better, and don't worry so much about what other people are going to think and say for what I'm doing.
And it really becomes toxic when we're putting on these masks where we look good, right? Because what ultimately happens is when people find out that you're not feeling good, when you're being more honest with people about how you're feeling, you end up getting angry when people say, how can you be sick? You look so good, right? And that's one of the themes we consistently see in the Lyme community, where, you're putting on this mask, you're repressing your feelings, and then finally you have this sort of this explosion of anger because you've been trying to put on a face for other people, which is again toxic for your recovery.
Yeah, 100%. I think so many people feel that way. And for me, that was huge, because I also feel like if I admitted how sick I was, and if I did let people see what I really was feeling, then it also almost admits it to myself how sick I am. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be sick. I didn't want to do any of this. I wanted to live my life and be a normal person and not have to be this person. And so, as much as I want to say that it was also a people pleasing thing, I think it was also me just trying to fight it and trying to.
Well, were you fighting it, or were you ignoring it? Right? Were you not
ignoring
admitting to yourself that you were sick?
Yeah.
Were you not, again, listening to your body signals tell you that you were so sick and tell you what you needed to do, right? Because what I'm seeing as the most powerful element of your transformation, as you're sharing your really powerful story with us, is when you didn't listen to your body, you got sicker. When you started to listen to your body, you were getting better. And every time you stop listening to your body, you'd have a relapse and get sick again. And then you come back and listen to your body and you start to get better, right? Because it goes all the way back to the point where again, and we use the term, I think in the West, of following our gut, but it's not really our gut, right? It's a different part of our brain, right? We stop negotiating with ourselves and we do what we feel like we should be doing to feel better, right? We don't let our cognitive functions control our decisions. We allow our more emotional elements of our brain drive us to what decisions we should be making, right? And you even got an image of something that you had forgotten about 3 years before, which ultimately allowed you to admit or acknowledge that you had Lyme disease, right? You had objective proof. You had a clinical diagnosis. You had the top Lyme disease testing company giving you results that you were sick. But it wasn't until you allow the emotional regions of your brain to give you the information that came to you about the rash that allowed you to put it all together. Again, you relied on your body and not on what your cognitive brain was telling you, which was, hey, the Western test said I wasn't sick. Hey, all the other doctors said I didn't have Lyme disease. When you moved away from the cognitive portion of your brain and you moved more into the emotional element of your brain, you got to a point where you now had signals that you could read that would allow you to get better.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about how you're now using that to help other people, right? Because you went through this unbelievably powerful transformation. You went on a personal development journey where you learned how to use the proper regions of your brain, which you're again using, you're describing it as following your gut, and you're now trying to help other people put themselves in a position where they can now have precision medicine. They can have precision testing. They can have measurements that will allow them to get better. And it doesn't come from your doctor's clinical diagnosis, and it doesn't come from the diagnostic testing that Western medicine gives to you. Where does it come from?
Yeah, it comes from you and knowing how you're feeling when you're doing these different things. Exactly. Yep. Yep. And I want people to really feel comfortable moving forward in their lives, feeling that way, that they know their body the best and that they can really judge what is helping them and what's not helping them and being able to heal themselves.
So let's talk about the real power of your story, right? Because you're not rejecting Western medicine. In fact, you use a lot of Western tools on your healing journey. You're not rejecting Western medicine. You're still a nurse and you're still helping people in that setting. Yet what you are doing is saying, hey, we have to be empowered to listen to ourselves, and we have to be empowered to advocate for ourselves, and we have to become the bosses of our treatment, where we're telling the doctors what we need and we're telling the doctors what is working, but we're still working with these really smart, well-intentioned people who have great tools. And it's the combination of now taking control and becoming the boss of our own treatment that allows us to heal, right?
Yeah, I love the way you put that. Absolutely. I still work as a nurse and I love Western medicine still. I think there are incredible things that I've seen it do for people. But I think that Western medicine is almost more of when people are, in the hospital, like doctors see people and they see they're not breathing and they want to intubate and give antibiotics and do all these things. And it's all this emergency medicine that we're all excited to heal and treat and do all these things. But I think we fail in the sense that people are also dying in the sense of a slow, chronically not able to tolerate day-to-day life. And that's where Western medicine is not the best part for, because it's just not the best way to heal in that sense. And so I truly believe in both sides of it. And I think there's a time and place for both of them. And I think, again, like I love the way my doctor says it, we have a whole toolkit here to help people heal. And we need to use all of our tools.
Right. So we shouldn't be running away from Western medicine. Western medicine has some awesome tools, right? But what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're measuring the effectiveness of the tools that are being offered to us based on the way our body is reacting to it and our body is signaling, right? So I think the place where Western medicine is failing, and it is certainly failing, but the place where it's failing is not in the tools that are offered, not in the training of the professionals like you and other medical professionals have Western training, because it's powerful training. Where it's failing is you're being trained as a Western practitioner to take control of somebody else's life. You're being trained as a Western practitioner to ride in on your white horse and tell us what you're going to do for us. And we are being conditioned by the Western industrial medical complex to hand our health over to you, because that's the only way we can get better. And that's really where it's failing. And that's where you've now grown and created a niche and filling a different niche with the work that you're doing as a health coach. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I've recently started doing a business where I just want people who are going through this type of thing to know that they have support, because like you said, doctors are coming in and they're telling you, do this, 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 and this, and you'll feel better. and boom, that's it. There's no support there. It's not what's the best for everyone. And so I am very specifically focused on the GI part of it because that was kind of what I went through the most and what I really learned the most with. But everyone's GI system is different, and it's not something that doctors will really focus on. If you see a GI specialist, 9 times out of 10, they'll give you an IBS diagnosis, and that's that. They don't do anything with your diet. They don't do anything to explain how there's certain ways of healing your gut without taking, a Miralax dose every day to help you have a more regulated bowel system. Or there's just so much that needs to be done outside of a healthcare setting. And that's really what I'm trying to do for people. And I want them to know that they are supported and that they have someone here when they feel nervous about changing their diet up or changing, any part of that system, what they're going to do. Someone's there for them, and there is support in that they can heal and they can live a happy, normal life that doesn't have to just always be based on how their stomach is doing that day.
Right. So, and another piece of this gut health that, of course, doctors are not helping us with is they're not recognizing that when we do not have a healthy gut, we can't be emotionally healthy either, because the vagus nerve is, of course, going to be triggered, and we're going to be in a place where we're likely to be in fight or flight. And because we're in fight or flight, because of the triggers, now we're in a position where we can't help in our own care, because we're now either fighting or fleeing or freezing or fainting or fawning our doctors and not giving them the kind of input that we need to give them in order to be able to help them, to help us to decide what tools need to be used, right? So it doesn't only just have this physiological element, but also has an emotional element when we don't have a healthy gut.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on with that, because a huge part of our gut is our emotions, and our emotions really affect our gut. And that's also the problem, is that a lot of doctors are using that to our disadvantage, where they say, well, you're depressed, your stomach isn't working well. Well, actually, it's the opposite. I am not feeling okay because my stomach isn't working well. And, I feel like I look 8 months pregnant every day. And how is that going to make you feel if that's not your normal self? And
Right.
so I think you're spot on with that, where I really hope to be there for someone so that they can see it in that sense, where let's get your stomach better and you will emotionally get better as well.
So when our emotions are not working, what's happening is we're not getting our body signals. When we don't get our body signals, we're not getting the measurement of whether something is working, and it just gets worse and it gets worse, and we spiral down, right?
Exactly. It's a huge spiral.
All right, now let's talk about the importance of coaching, because I love coaches, right? And I went from being a New Yorker who asked the question when we first started hearing about health coaches, like, what the hell is this health coach stuff? I mean, everybody in California is a health coach, and we never heard of them here in New York, right? So I went from really having a skeptical response to health coaching to now loving health coaches and thinking they're a vital part of a healing journey. So talk to us about health coaching. And you are obviously somebody that is focusing on one really important element of coaching, but talk to us about what health coaches really should be doing and what their role is in a healing journey for somebody that's suffering from chronic Lyme disease.
I almost wish there was a different term for health coaches, because health coach it's so much more than that. It's more of just a friendly support. That's all we need as these people. Everyone knows how they're feeling. It's an individual, your body. And so as a health coach, I don't want to say that I know anything more than someone else. I've been through a lot with my gut, so I've learned so much with my own gut, but everyone's different. And so I think the most important thing is that there's someone there validating your feelings. They're validating the fact that you feel bad when you eat this one food, whether you're allergic to it or not. That's what it is, And so
let's pause it, because I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? What a coach does is a coach validates our feelings. A coach encourages us to become our own coach, listening to our own signals and taking the steps to help us to get to the point where we can read our signals, that we can. Because look, I think the argument that a lot of people make, which I'm going to have to disagree with you on, is we all know our own body. No, yes, our body will give us signals, but we don't listen to them. In fact, we
Yeah.
talk ourselves out of them. We suffer medical trauma and we're discouraged from listening to them. We suffer trauma and go into fight or flight and can't even read any of our signals. So yes, our body does have the ability to give us signals. Yes, our body does know best, but we don't know our body best. We don't know how we feel. And that's the biggest problem that we have. And I think that's where coaches like you play the most vital role in the healing journey. Give me your thoughts about that.
I love that, actually. I love that you brought that up because you tend to, I don't know, not think that way, but you're so right. I mean, that truly is, you hit it on the nail. Our body gives us all of these signals, but do we have the tools to listen to it? No. And so that's exactly what I want to be here for people. I want to give you the tools. I want to validate it. I want to support it. And I want to help people be able to listen to themselves and to be able to figure out how to stick to their gut and know their gut feelings and know what's right for them and support them.
I absolutely
in
love that. So I absolutely love that. So I can't ask you any more questions because that is absolutely a highlight that we need to cut out and use as an audio box. So let me ask you the last question we ask on Tick Bootcamp, because we can only go downhill when you hit it as perfectly as you did just hit it there. So let's talk about what you would do, both as a now nurse and a health coach. If someone that you love came into the room right after this podcast and they had a tick biting them, what would you recommend that they do so they wouldn't go from the acute to chronic phase that you went through on your Lyme disease journey?
I would tell them to remove the tick in the right way, save the tick, save it for testing. I would recommend going on the doxycycline, of course, with a doctor's order. Go to the doctor and see the right doctor. I would also have them look up a Lyme literate doctor and also do all the supportive measures outside of that, because none of the supportive measures are harmful in the sense of doing the detoxing and doing the healthy eating and doing all the things that support yourself outside of Lyme disease. I think there's so much, just support your body just in case and live a healthy life, but definitely focus on getting in and knowing exactly what it is right away and just being proactive about it.
Emily Hogan, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful journey with the Tick Bootcamp community.
Thank you for listening to our Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Emily Hogan. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Emily, please visit her on Instagram at sticktoyourgut. Second, if you've enjoyed this episode of our Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com/bite to view the blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on your podcast platform of choice. And finally, if you'd like to search our podcast library of over 250 episodes for specific keywords, subscribe to our email list, or share feedback with us, please visit our website at tickbootcamp.com. Thank you, as always, for listening.